Hi there, I'm Tristan Field Jones, joined along with my co-host MJ Banias. MJ and I recorded an episode with one of our intelligence analysts about a month and a half ago regarding what happens when the Queen dies, and we went over the numerous disruptions that will follow. MJ, there are so many factors to keep in mind, and again, this is a story that's just unfolding, and it's not a matter of her death, her funeral, and it's over. These disruptions will last for weeks, maybe even months.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we know for a fact that the United Kingdom has special operations in place, ready to go at a moment's notice if a member of the royal family dies, and obviously including the Queen. And we now know that those operations have been put into place. So in this interview with Russ, we dive into what these operations are, what they look like, how they function, and more importantly, how they're designed to ease any potential security risks or disruptions. But the best laid plans, aren't always perfect, and they can definitely have hiccups.
And our real time coverage team, who provide alerts to organizations and people around the world, really have their finger on the pulse when it comes to this. So they've been keeping track of this ongoing and developing situation very, very closely. So they definitely know the ins and outs and everything to expect. Again, this interview was recorded about a month and a half ago, so that is something just to keep in mind. But the disruptions that we discuss very much are still going to happen in one way or another over the coming weeks. Anyway, that is all dived into in this special episode of SitRep, where we chat with Russ Tottenham, who again is one of our intelligence analysts on our real time coverage team.
We're expecting some pretty massive, widespread security disruptions. So the first thing that's going to happen, it's sort of a well-known secret at this point, is Operation London Bridge would be triggered, which is essentially what happens during the occurrence of the Queen's passing. There's a whole process that takes place that we don't really need to dig into, but essentially you've got the Queen's secretary notifying, the Prime Minister and the cabinet and the Privy Council, who then is going to notify the senior civil servants, and they'll notify the Foreign Office, who will let the Commonwealth nations know. All of this happening, within hours. The local radio is going to begin doing pre-recorded broadcastings, the BBC, things like that. There'll be a note posted at the gates of Buckingham Palace. So that's sort of the security in terms of what would happen, directly following her passing. What's really interesting to look at, though, is the coming days and even the coming weeks. You've got Operation Spring Tide, which is essentially the funeral plans are going to work in operation with Spring Tide, which is the plan for the Prince of Wales' ascension to the throne. So there's a whole big week-long process of doing that, where he's got to travel around the UK. Of course, that's a security risk in and of itself. The funeral itself of the Queen is, some people are saying, going to be the largest security incident or event, excuse me, I should say, in modern history, right? Think of the amount of heads of state that are going to be there. And yeah, there's a lot of moving parts.
Has London ever seen like the amount of people that would show up for this? Like, has this ever happened before, where London would need to has like a place it can kind of look back on and say, okay, we've kind of been down this road before. Let's use that and look at it today. Or is this kind of unprecedented?
The short answer is no. I would probably venture to say that there isn't really a situation like this that's ever happened to any city in recent history. If you just take to consideration how many countries she's the head of state in, right, and how many members of the Commonwealth there are, they're all going to be sending dignitaries and teams and heads of, not heads of state, but they're all going to be sending politicians. So you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of security risks just in the individuals being there themselves. That is, of course, a nightmare for anybody who is a security manager in the region, anybody who is a business owner in the region, anybody who has to do anything in relation to transportation in the area. The airports are going to be we're already experiencing right now disruptions in the airports, right? We're seeing huge delays. There's different reasons for that, but I think that this would be unprecedented, especially the UK airports, of course, Heathrow and whatnot. The amount of people trying to flock into London would be something never seen before. Just people who are trying to, pay their respects to the Queen, the average person, on top of the enormous amount of politicians and leaders of countries, all their security teams that have to come with them. So that's of course just getting into the country is going to be pretty chaotic. Once you're there, we'll think about mass transport, public transport, the bus systems, the taxis, the Uber. It's going to be completely overwhelmed. Um, accommodations, hotels, Airbnb, whatever you want to use. It's, going to be booked up instantaneously. There's simply not enough supply for the demand in that scenario. Furthermore, the local security forces and the police are obviously going to do the absolute best that they can. But how do you even prepare for that as a police force? A situation where, the entire, downtown area of London is essentially going to be just filled shoulder to shoulder with people.
You get so many people in there. Are protests a concern on top of all the other, on top of all the other security issues that might be present? Or is that just going to be a matter of you've got, speaker's corner, or you've got this place where you can tell the world how much you dislike the monarchy or whatever it is you're protesting?
Yeah, I think protests are definitely a concern. Interestingly, both within the United Kingdom and outside as well. So it's pretty well known that there are some people, within the UK that aren't exactly fond of the royal family, and you're probably going to see protests in terms of people, saying, we're coming into a recession. A lot of people believe we're coming out of a pandemic. There's, tremendous amounts of debt, and it's tough times in general financially for people. We're talking, high inflation, high gas prices, things like that. Do we really need to be spending millions of dollars on this funeral for this person? So you could see a lot of protests revolving around the finances of the situation. Furthermore, there's countries in the world that she's the head of state in. Primarily, if you look in the Caribbean, you've got situations where there's countries that have been protesting already that they don't really want her to be the head of state in their country anymore. In 2021, Barbados actually removed her as the head of state from their country. You've got countries like Jamaica, Belize, the Bahamas. They're like I said, they're already protesting. So I think that some of those groups and some of those individuals, they may view this as an opportunity to enhance and further protest, because it's going to be a transitional period.
How do we even begin to imagine the scale of security preparations needed when you have all these important people gathered in one place? Because I hate to say it, but if you're a terrorist organization or someone with nefarious intent, you're looking at this like it's a golden opportunity to cause an immense amount of disruption. So, how do you even begin to plan for an event of this magnitude?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, and a very difficult scenario for anyone. So, of course, in the background, you're going to have intelligence organizations working. MI5 is in the UK, and anybody who's sending any sort of foreign dignitary, anything, they're going to have their intelligence working, ensuring the safety and security of those individuals. So, of course, for example, American delegations over the president have the Secret Service and whatnot. So internally, these groups that are traveling to the region should have their own security protocols in place. On top of that, though, you're also going to have local security entities, the police and whatnot. I would imagine their primary concern is going to be things like crowd control. We immediately start thinking of things like terrorist attacks and shootings. Of course, right now the active shooter is so commonly in the media cycle, unfortunately, and rightfully so, you should be thinking about these things, and we can look back and talk about them. But I think it's also important to note that when you just have a large amount of people in one area, you're going to have security incidents that aren't even necessarily nefarious in nature, right? You have situations like tramplings of large groups of people, and people are going to get hurt. I think that furthermore, though, you've got situations that the royal family is so iconic that they have issues in and of themselves where, for example, Michael Fagan back in the 1980s, he, famously he snuck into Buckingham Palace into the Queen's bedroom, and it was sort of this enormous incident where how could this possibly happen, right? So you have people who around the world unfortunately have this, whether it may be something along the lines of mental health issues. A lot of them think that they are the next in line. They think that they're somehow the child of the queen, and that they should be ascending to the royal throne next. So there's going to be situations like that where there's people attempting to make contact with royal family members. And again, these aren't necessarily, purposeful terrorist attacks, which is an enormous threat. But even outside of that, like I said, just the sheer volume of people being there, and the fact that there's so many moving parts. Again, I don't envy who's working that job.
Do we know what has been done and what we're still sort of waiting for when it comes to preparations for this?
It's a great question. So this is kept pretty well secret. It's we touched on it before. It's Operation London Bridge, which there's been quite a few leaks though. That's how we know what we do know. But again, it's leaks. So what's the truth? What's not? What's changed? What hasn't? Preparations have already been put in place. Pretty famously, there was an incident on Twitter where someone accidentally, implied that the queen had passed, and it was while they were doing test runs. So we do know that they are planning for this. Of course, local security services are always going to have plans in place. They're always going to have, local police departments are going to have their standard operating procedures for large events, right? It's not like a really large scale event is something new to the city of London. They have them all the time. It's just the magnitude of this one, the sheer volume of people fluctuating into the country, also leaving.
Well, and Russ, I can't help but think of just the sheer scale of all these preparations that need to take place. I mean, the more we talk about this, the more I'm thinking, for instance, suspicious packages, right? How many people are going to bring bags with them to carry a phone to see this? How often is it that, a backpack that was left behind accidentally is just a backpack? And I can't even imagine what it must be like trying to sweep a massive area, and you have to think every single little thing could be a potential security risk, even though most, if not all of them, will turn out to be absolutely nothing.
I can't think of an event that's ever been on this level in at least my lifetime. The Here at Samdesk, we deal with situations like suspicious packages, bomb scares, on a daily basis. You you follow your protocols is how you deal with it. To sort of answer your question is that all these security management organizers are going to have SOPs in place, standard operating procedures for what do we do when we find a suspicious package, because unfortunately it's going to happen. And like you alluded to, 99% of the time it's just somebody who forgot their purse or their bag, or something along those lines, or a camera bag. It happens in airports all the time, unfortunately, but you treat it the same way you would as if there were explosives or some sort of chemical agent within there. You take your security precautions, because it's better to be, over prepared 99 times than to be under prepared that one time. Always, right? Always. So I think that's sort of the answer to that question you follow your SOPs the best you can, and you plan for the sheer volume right? You need to recognize that, maybe we normally have answer X, Y, and Z, and that works for dealing with, 10,000 people or something along those lines. But what happens when there's 100,000 people trying to get as close as possible to the gates of Buckingham Palace, right? What do you do then? Well, you might need 10 times more the security force. That's a possible answer. Furthermore, there's of course tools and whatnot like that we do here at Samdesk, global threat and disruption monitoring. It's a perfect, a little plug, but it's our tool is essentially designed for incidents like this to better help organizations, individuals, to kind of get an idea of what's going on in the area.
Would it be advisable for the security managers and crisis management, risk assessment people to basically say, listen, we should just pull our people out of that area and set up satellite offices potentially outside of urban London, right? Like prepare for the fact that London is going to shut down. Like downtown core London's going to grind to a halt. Is there wisdom in taking our people out of there, moving them elsewhere, having them work from home, whatever, just to avoid any possible conflicts and issues that could arise for, our corporation or our company or our NGO or government agency, whatever? What would be your advice in this situation?
Great question. I think it depends on who you are and what you do, right? So the police can't just say, "Oh, we're just going to pack up and head outside of the city," right? Of course, that's not something that is in the realm of possibility. But I mean, it might be wise if you own a business right in the downtown area that's going to be heavily affected and closed off. It might be a wise decision to say, "Listen, we're going to close up the shop for maybe this first week, and then play it by ear and go from there." Again, I guess I'm plugging our company again, but that's a situation where if you had a tool, for example, like the Samdesk tool or whatever it may be, you can monitor what's going on based on geolocation, and you can actually see maps and go, okay, well, this is where my shop is, or this is where my security team operates in this vicinity, and it looks like actually traffic is okay there. We could keep the doors open, and because of course you always want to prepare for any sort of safety incident, security incident, any type of, shooting, suspicious package, whatever it may be. But you also got to look at the flip side of it, and you don't want to have your business or your organization closed down for too long, longer than it needs to be, or closed down if it doesn't need to be altogether. So that's a decision that would be needed to be made by the individual organization heads. I could definitely see some of them making the decision that you alluded to, saying, "Listen, we're just gonna get everyone to work from home. We're gonna set up, satellite areas," because the reality is for probably 2 weeks to a month, the downtown core of London is going to be just almost inaccessible. The funeral is estimated to be somewhere between 10 and 12 days after her passing. The British government is essentially going to be almost in a state of paralysis for that 10 days. They're shutting down. Of course, they're going to be doing the situation where they bring in the new monarch, but it's that mourning period is going to be pretty massive. And we touched on it. The amount of people coming into the city is going to be unheard of. So the pros and cons of having your organization being opened or closed in that vicinity is something that the individuals will have to weigh, but I could definitely see people making the decision to just say, you know what, it's not worth it.
We're talking a lot about the security disruptions and travel disruptions and, potential impacts to business operations, that sort of thing. Russ, are there any maybe unexpected disruptions we need to consider? Maybe some unusual elements that we're not talking about as much that should really maybe not be top of mind, but should at least be considered?
I think it's important to remember that just because you're not in the United Kingdom, or you don't really fancy yourself someone who maybe cares a lot about the royal family or something along those lines, that doesn't mean you're immune to this. It doesn't mean that you don't have to worry about it. Particularly in major cities or in Commonwealth areas, those international airports are going to be disrupted as well. If you're in Toronto, let's say, um, there's direct flights, there's connecting flights. They're all going to be just filled, jam packed, right? So even if you're not going to London, don't be surprised when your local airport is experiencing severe delays and disruptions, and the transportation system's bogged down, because I think it's almost hard to overestimate the sheer amount of people that are going to be attempting to travel for, really upwards of a month. That first 2 weeks of people trying to get to London for, let's say, the funeral or whatever it may be. Of course, not all of them are going to be able to. First of all, you might have people who just can't get time off work that quickly, but they want to go. So they got to, 2 weeks later, they're going to go. Or, I mean, the airlines aren't going to be able to have enough tickets and enough seats to get people there those first couple of weeks. So you're probably going to see people continuing to stream into the country for 3-4 weeks, well after the funeral even. So I think that would be something that is maybe unexpected for a lot of people, is that, even outside of the UK, you're going to see some disruptions, primarily in terms of transportation. On a lighter note, if you're within the UK, don't expect to see your favorite sitcom on the television that evening, because most people think that most comedy broadcasts are gonna be pulled from the air out of respect to the Queen.
From the perspective of a security analyst, Russ, someone who does your job, um, what are you sort of sitting back and worrying about or contemplating about when it comes to this situation? Like, if you're an intelligence analyst, security analyst, whatever, how's this going to impact your career directly? Um, Even if you don't live in England, how is this going to impact a guy like you?
Yeah, I worry about those initial 2 weeks primarily. I anytime large amounts of people gather for anything, it kind of gets anybody in the security world. Yeah, you're kind of going, well, we need to start paying attention to this, obviously, because first and foremost, that's a soft target for anybody who has any sort of malicious intent. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but I would be surprised if, either weeks or months after the funeral and the whole incident takes place, if we don't hear of foiled attempts by MI5, by the CIA or FBI, whomever it may be. I would be pretty surprised if we didn't hear that they didn't at least stop some sort of attack or attacks, right? It's just, I think if you're a terrorist cell or any sort of nefarious actor, you're almost salivating at the thought of all these heads of state being there. That being said, though, obviously security is going to be at an all-time high. So it's a risk versus reward. You kind of, if you want to get away with it, this is not a good idea. But if you just want as much publicity and to hopefully wreak as much havoc as possible, any sort of explosion event or any sort of active shooting type event would be pretty catastrophic at an event like this. So I worry about that. I also worry about just the sheer shutdown of logistics, in terms of, we touched on it, the airports and the transportation in the UK itself, but furthermore, outside to internationally, you look at, like, what is Toronto Pearson Airport going to look like for that 2 weeks, where you have large amounts of people trying to go to the UK, journalists and just, we can't even begin to imagine how many people are going to be going there, and so I think that those are probably the two main things that I worry about, is some sort of attack, which hopefully does not happen. And then, of course, just the logistical nightmare that is an event this large taking place. I mean, we have sort of our own little plan in place, where, we know we're going to have our own standard operating procedures of what to do, what we notify our clients of what's happening, things like that. So
Overall, Russ, how would you assess the global impact of her death and funeral on a scale of 1 to 10?
this is a big one. This is something globally for that initial few weeks there, upwards of a month or so. It's going to be massive. If you're looking at, if you're outside the UK, and you're not particularly, directly involved in the situation, it might not be much of a change for you. But To put a number on it, I guess something that's tough. Maybe I'd say maybe an 8 or a 9 out of 10, because every single headline of the news, every newspaper around the world almost is going to be about the Queen's passing. When you open up your phone, if you open up any news app, guess what? The head articles are all going to be about. Um, International airports across the entire world are going to have massive delays, is what's predicted. To varying degrees, of course. The closer you get to the UK, probably the worse it's going to get, and the Commonwealth nations are gonna get the short end of the stick in terms of those delays. But I mean, when you look at the fact that the on top of that, the accommodations are all going to be overwhelmed, and the public transport, it's a massive event. And then, sort of the icing on the cake is the fact that you've got these protests that are likely going to happen in places like, the Caribbean and whatnot, where they maybe don't want this monarch to be the head of their state anymore. So that's going to have some pretty wide ranging effects. And I mean, the funeral itself is massive. It's some analysts are saying it's going to be the largest security event in modern history. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably put it in an 8 or a 9.
Again, that's Russ Tottenham. He's an intelligence analyst on our real-time coverage team. Those are the folks here at Samdesk responsible for sending out crisis alerts to organizations and people around the world. They really have their finger on the pulse in terms of this. And again, we can't emphasize enough, MJ, that just because, the word of her death is starting to spread and, there are going to be plans for a funeral. I mean, these disruptions are going to last for a while. So this is still going to be quite relevant for the next several weeks or months.
Again, for any individuals who work in the security field, crisis monitoring, whatever, I mean, this is going to play out relatively slowly over the coming weeks, and it's only going to escalate as we get closer to a funeral date and the eventual funeral itself. So for all of our listeners, if you work in this industry, begin preparing yourself for the outcomes that are going to play out. I mean, this is definitely going to impact airports across the globe. It's going to impact travel across the globe. It's going to impact potentially world markets. We are seeing a key moment in history, the death of the longest reigning monarch. And I think what Russ said in this interview is essential listening for anyone in this field.
Absolutely. Russ Tottenham, again, a member of our real-time coverage team, joining us on this episode. Fantastic insight, and Samdesk will continue to monitor the ongoing disruptions. I'm Tristan Field-Jones, along with MJ Banias. Thank you for listening to this special episode of the podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, you can always email us, sitrep@samdesk.io. Follow us on Twitter, find us on LinkedIn, just look up Samdesk. That's all one word. Until next time, stay safe out there.